welcome to part 3 of the Dress Like a Man series. Since 2010, I've helped thousands of men either start or advance their journey of killing complacency and overcoming mediocrity through the simple act of dressing more intentionally. Now, the clothing that we put on our bodies can either reaffirm the story that we're used to telling ourselves and those around us, or it can help us as we start to tell a new, better version of that story. So before we go any further, make sure if you haven't that you go watch the first 2 videos in this series, because not only do they set the tone, but everything that we're going to be talking about in today's video builds off of the foundations of what we're established in those. So if you haven't watched them, go watch them and then come back to this. So let's talk about moving beyond the simple science of style and having a few basic staples in your wardrobe. Remember though, you don't want to jump ahead of yourself, because one of the biggest tells of someone who is both new and inexperienced in the art of dressing intentionally is the overcorrection. You probably have seen what I'm talking about. It's the guys who feel like they have to be wearing ascots or furry hats or 3-piece suits in order to have their clothing work for them instead of against them. But here's the problem, and my friend Ed Lattimore said this better than anybody else, so I'm just gonna quote him. We're all beginners in the same way. Any complex skill will always produce different styles at the top levels. This happens because there are a set of fundamental ideas that everyone participating in must understand. Basically, you need to be okay with being a beginner and also with moving up the ladder at your own pace, whether that's slowly or quickly. If you start trying to create your own style or emulate the masters without understanding the basic principles, you're going to fail 9 times out of 10 and you're gonna look silly. Think about how effortless Olympic athletes can make their sports look, and about how each one of them can approach the exact same sport with their own different set of style or standards. It certainly didn't start out like that. They spent years drilling the basics over and over and over again. As they started to progress, they figured out how they could take these same principles and apply them to their own circumstances, or give them a little bit of a different application, then continue to practice over and over and over again, and eventually become masters. Focusing on the perfection of advanced techniques without familiarity of the basics is just as misguided with your style as it is for athletes or musicians or anybody else who's developed a complex skill set. Basically, if you don't understand the science of style and already have a few key, simple items in your wardrobe, you're going to be making this stuff way more difficult than it actually needs to be. However, if you feel like you've already got that down and you're ready to take it to the next level, the key to that is understanding that clothing is communication and your style is telling a story. I want you to think back to a film or a book or some sort of story that really resonated with you. I want you to think about the hero, the challenges that he faced, the obstacles that he overcame, the growth that he had, all the things that he went through to become the man at the end of the journey that he wasn't when he started. Okay, now think about that same story from the perspective of the producer or the author. These creators are highly invested in telling their stories as well as they possibly can, and it is in their best interest to make sure that every little detail that you, the consumer of their content, are exposed to is as perfect and consistent as it can be, which includes the clothing that the characters wear. Whether that story is set in feudal Japan or urban New York or a space station 500 years from now, one of the biggest factors used in setting the stage and even telling the story is the clothing that is worn. It's one of the easiest ways to tell the good guys from the bad guys or to help people along their journey. So no, of course, clothes don't make the man, but they do set the tone. To see this for yourself, go thumb through some novel, any novel, and tell me if within the first chapter, probably even within the first couple of pages, the author doesn't take a paragraph or two to actually describe what the characters are wearing and what they look like. Go back and watch your favorite film and see if the characters are wearing amorphous, androgynous gray sacks that wouldn't necessarily stand out or fit in at any other point in history. Of course not. They're wearing clothing that is appropriate to the story that's being told. The best storytellers in the world understand that the way that their characters look can be a big part in helping the audience either identify with or reject them. For the most part, heroes look like heroes and villains look like villains, which is not to say that it's universal as far as the actual application of style. History and culture are full of men who have worn different things from each other, and even today in the 21st century, you go into a big city and not all men are wearing the same things. We're all telling different stories with our clothing. So with that in mind, I want you to take a minute and look at what you're wearing right now. Do it. Just look at it. What does it communicate to the world around you? If you were to see another man wearing the exact same clothing you have on right now, what would your assessment of him be? Is that the story you want to be telling? Does it need a complete revamp or maybe just a little editing? In order to elaborate this idea, we're going to pull some examples of two of the main stories that men have always been interested in telling each other: mastery and loyalty, and how your clothing can contribute to this communication. Now, mastery is a huge component of masculinity. It's how we size each other up. It's how we know if another man is someone that we should admire, respect, maybe even fear. It's helped establish hierarchies and solidified organizations for millennia. Think about the men you and others around you look up to. Part of the reason that we admire and respect them so much is because they're masters in their own domains. The best athletes, artists, and businessmen all succeed in large part because of their mastery. And even if it's not mastery of their craft, it's mastery of other things that get you interested in seeing them as great, above average men. We value those who are above average, and that's part of the reason why we have an innate desire to rise above mediocrity ourselves. Okay, so all of that is well and good, but how does that actually translate to your style? Well, let me give you a concrete example or two from a world that I'm very familiar with. We'll talk about the world of suiting. It should come as no surprise to you that not all suits are created equal, and yes, it's easy to tell the difference between a suit that fits well and one that doesn't. But mastery certainly doesn't end there. Most men will start thinking immediately of big, bold, in-your-face ways to improve their suiting. They'll think that a demonstration of mastery requires bright colors, bold patterns, or unique fits that aren't average. Basically anything that someone who's not into the world of suiting would look at and recognize it as, okay, this isn't your average suit. But the real masters in this sartorial world of suiting know that yes, those things sometimes can correlate with better suiting or mastery, but they're certainly not the cause of it. For that, they look at much more subtle indicators. Take, for example, the Barchetta pocket. Now, this is a small and a simple thing. It's basically a version of a breast pocket on a suit jacket or a sport coat that, rather than being cut straight across, starts to curve upward as it moves out away from the center of the chest. To the uninitiated, this can look odd or amateurish, and that's assuming that the average guy even notices it at all. But those who are part of the sartorial tribe will see it and recognize it as a symbol of both mastery and loyalty. Mastery because they understand that it was created because it helps the garment drape better across the chest, and it helps that pocket flow more smoothly over the curved shape of your chest. And loyalty because they know that it's a detail that's typically only worn by men within their tribe. Your average department store suit is not going to have a detail like that. Or look at the functioning buttonholes on jacket sleeves. Most men don't even recognize that the buttons on the cuffs of their suit jackets don't work, that they're just sewn on there for ornamentation. Or if they do, then they just write it off as some sort of an old anachronism from a time past when suits needed to have buttons on the sleeves. Whereas those who are in the tribe will once again use something like functioning buttonholes to demonstrate both mastery and loyalty. Mastery because the functioning buttonholes, the fact that there are actual holes cut in the sleeves, limits what you can do as far as lengthening or shortening the sleeves, which means that they're typically only seen on custom pieces. And loyalty because, just like with the Barchetta pocket, it's a more subtle and more rare detail, and if you have it, then it shows that you actually are deep enough within this culture, within this tribe, that you have found this detail, you chose to embrace it, and you want to show it to others. Many of us who are in the sartorial menswear tribe will leave that bottom button undone, not because it increases function in any way, it doesn't, but because it's a way for us to signal to other like-minded men both our mastery and our loyalty within that given particular tribe. Add to those other details like soft shoulders or big bellied lapels or sweeping front quarters, and then double it up with things you can do with fit, like adjust for posture or shoulder slope or sleeve pitch. And you have something that won't ever look like a simple basic suit, even if it is made out of a plain navy twill fabric. And even if you're not somebody who's interested in suiting, the combination of all these little details will make a suit stand out. You may not be able to articulate and say, well, that suit looks better because the shoulders slope and because the pocket curves and because the front quarter sweep. The average guy isn't going to be able to actually identify and call out what makes it better, but he will be able to see that suit A looks better than suit B. Which brings us around to one of the biggest and most important aspects of dressing intentionally. If you take those same 10 items that I gave you in the last video and you want to expand from there, that does not mean that you're limited to buying different or more items. You can take those same 10 items and buy variations of them that make them better. That navy sport coat that I wore in that second look, that's simple, but it's not, because it fits me great. It's got the barchetta pocket, it's got patch pockets, it has soft shoulders, all of those little subtle details. That's why you guys are able to recognize that that's not a department store jacket, that there's something special about it, even if it is the most boring staple of all time, the plain navy sport coat. Which ultimately, if you think a piece like that is boring, it's because you're still in a limited mindset where you think that the only way to be above average is to somehow be unique or different or odd. Now, don't take it too far the other direction and think that that means I'm saying you should be limited to those 35 items. The vest that I'm wearing today, for example, that's not one of those 35 staples. But I also don't want you to think that the only way to improve your wardrobe is that you have to go buy things that nobody else is wearing. You can do the same thing and just do it better. Going back to our example of athletes, the best guys in the Olympics, they're not playing a different sport, they're not playing by different rules, they're just doing a better job within the existing rules and the existing functions of the sport. So there's the basics of it, and here's your formula for dressing intentionally. Learn the science of style. Things like fit, color, and pattern. Pick up culturally neutral but great looking staples to help you start building a versatile and effective wardrobe, and then get deliberate about what stories you want your style to tell and how it's going to actually accomplish that. It's the same formula that well-dressed men have used forever, and it will work just as well for you as it does for anybody else. So if you're really ready to dial this in, to start really dressing in a way that leads to real life benefits, I'm gonna be releasing a course for you guys in the next couple of days. And this is the way that it works. I take the things that we've talked about over the last 3 days, that formula, and I dive in deeper on each one of them. I give you all the science of style stuff: fit, color, contrast, pattern, proportions, all of it. Then you get all 35 of the items I recommend you have in your wardrobe. And finally, give you all 4 stories that men are primarily interested in telling each other, and give you examples of how to do that with your clothing. The next video is going to have more details on what that looks like, along with a special offer for you guys who jump on early. So be ready for the next email that I send out, because that's going to give you the breakdown of what this looks like. In the meantime, I want to hear from you. What are ways, either subtle or strong, that you've been able to take your style from the basics, from the foundations, into something that's more personalized and more individual? So make sure that you leave me a comment below.